All right, if you have your Bibles, let's open to Genesis chapter 27. If you don't know where Genesis is in your Bible, that's okay. It's the very first book. We're going to be looking at chapter 27. We're going to spend the next 2 weeks, today and next Sunday, on the patriarch who is named Jacob. And one Jewish commentator, you always like to add a Jewish commentator into your Old Testament reading because they know the culture and the climate so much better than we Western Americans do. And his summary of everything that happens between Genesis 12 and Genesis 33, that's the life of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. He summarizes it this way, and this is really helpful. In the life of Abraham, what you learn is that God is faithful. What you learn in the life of Isaac is that God will remain faithful. And then what you learn in the life of Jacob is that God will remain faithful despite us. Did you catch that? The life of Abraham, God is faithful. The life of Isaac, God will remain faithful. And then when you study the life of Jacob, what do you learn? That God will remain faithful despite you and despite me and despite people like Jacob. We've got more information on Jacob than we do Abraham and Isaac together. Now, why is that? Let's find out together. This is Genesis chapter 27. I'm going to begin in verse 18. I'm going to let it stay seated for this part of the service. So he went in to his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" And Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn, and I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." But Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son?" He answered, "Because the Lord your God granted me success." Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come near, that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not." So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, who felt him and said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. And he said, "Are you really my son Esau?" He answered, "I am." Then he said, "Bring it near to me, that I may eat of my son's game and bless you." So he brought it near to him, and he ate. And he brought him wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come near and kiss me, my son." So he came near and kissed him. And Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, "See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, when Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, Esau his brother came in from his hunting. He also prepared delicious food and brought it to his father. And he said to his father, "Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me." His father Isaac said to him, "Who are you?" He answered, "I am your son, your firstborn Esau." Then Isaac trembled very violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate it, and all before you came, and I have blessed him. Yes, and he shall be blessed." And as soon as Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This story was so long I couldn't put it all in our bulletin and in our text, but we'll kind of go through it as we look at this passage together. But by means of an introduction, I was watching a clip from a CNN story this past week. I don't watch a lot of national news, but this is a clip that somebody had posted and shared on social media, and it was a clip of a gentleman. His name is Chris Cuomo, and he's the brother of the New York City mayor. And he was sharing his thoughts on, the life and, the struggles of living in the midst of a pandemic and all of the injustice and issues and protests that we're seeing right now. And here's how he concluded his segment. Okay, so this is kind of how he ended it before he cut off and was taken off screen. Here's what he said. He said, final thoughts. If you believe in one another, and if you do the right thing for yourself and the community, things will get better in this country. You don't need help from above. It's within us. Good night, and he's off the show. Let me read that again. If you believe in one another, and if you do the right thing for yourself and for the community, things will get better in this country. You don't need help from above. It's within you. Now, what is he saying when he says this? Really, that's nothing new. That's the moral of every Disney story. That's the software that we're all born with, this idea that if we want goodness, if we want the blessed life, if we want favor, we can't look up to find it. We have to look inside ourselves. A blessing doesn't come from outside of us. It's not derivative. It's not given. It's not bestowed. It comes from inside of yourself. It has to be found. It has to be sought after within your very own heart. Now, there's a number of problems with this one idea. One is this: if that were true, if that sentiment were true, don't you think after 2,000 years we would have figured that out? Our problems would be solved. It's just self-actualizing, right? We would have figured this out. Things would be a whole lot better than they are, but they're not. But Jacob could write the book on this code of blessing and favor comes from within. It doesn't come from without. This is like written across his brow. Unlike Abraham, who is Jacob's grandfather, there aren't any stories in the book of Genesis that paint Jacob in a favorable or a faithful or in a very, very good light. You know, Abraham, at different parts in his story, Abraham, embodies great faith, great mistakes, but great faith. You study the story of Jacob, you really have to struggle to find a bright spot, a good spot. He embodies this idea, this motto, this code. You don't need to look up, just look within. Jacob is a self-made man in his own mind. So that's what I want to look at this morning. What does it look like to be a self-made person, a self-made Christian? So 2 points this morning: the want of blessing, and then second, the fountain of blessing. The want of blessing and the fountain of blessing. So first, the want of blessing. I don't know what you hear when you hear that word blessing. It has a different meaning in the Old Testament than it does now. If somebody says the word blessing today, that means either they're praying for the meal, that prayer that goes before eating together, or they're saying it about someone who has just made a mistake, right? Bless that person's heart. Bless him or her. That's how we typically use that word, but that's not how it was used in the Old Testament. A blessing in the Old Testament was tangible. It was something. It was, even though it was words, it was very material. Blessings can be bartered, right? What happens in Genesis chapter 25, leading up to this passage, is Jacob has kind of tricked his brother Esau out of the blessing. Esau comes back in from a hunt. He's famished. He's exhausted. He needs food, and it just so happens Jacob is making food. And he says, "Jacob, give me a bowl of your food." And Jacob says, "Okay, I'll do it, but only if you give me your blessing." Esau says, "Fine." So it can be bartered with. It can be traded for goods, in a sense. So Jacob gives him food. He gives Esau a meal. Esau gives Jacob the blessing. It can be stolen, right? In this passage, Jacob deceives his father, dresses like him, smells like him, feels like him, doesn't talk like him. That's the kink in the chain here, and in the armor. He doesn't talk like Esau, but he tricks his father into receiving it. And once you receive it, this blessing is something that can't be taken away, right? Even Isaac confirms that Back in verse 33, yes, or yea, or indeed, Jacob shall be blessed. Once this blessing is given, it can't be taken back. It's something that's very, very tangible, right? And Esau, lastly, he mourns over it in verse 34, right? It doesn't just say, Esau was sad. When he heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceeding great and bitter cry. To lose a blessing was something mournful. It was tragic. It caused Esau great grief. And you might be going, well, this is different time, different economy, and a different world entirely. We don't talk like that. We don't work like that. Our hearts don't operate that way. And I ask, are you sure about that? Are you sure about that? We just may call it something different. Think about the power of words. Think about if someone has blessed you, use their words to show you favor or to show you kindness. You can remember that with clarity. At the same time, if someone curses you, or if someone's ever made fun of you or mocked you, either at school or at work, it's hard to forget that. And you can remember the curses with painful clarity, can't you? In this passage, what's happening is Isaac is giving Jacob, the second-born, this promise, this blessing, this favor, because up until this point, Esau has been Isaac's favorite. He's a man of the woods. He's a man's man. He's big. He's a hunter-gatherer. He makes really, really good food. And already his father favors him. And Rebekah, Isaac's wife, she loves Jacob. Jacob is favored in her eyes. He is her favorite. And each knows this. Whose favorite is who? And it's divided this family. This family is poisoned by favoritism, is poisoned by blessing, by love, exclusively to one child or the other. And it's destroyed this family. You remember words. You remember blessings. You remember curses. But think about this. Here's what Tim Keller says about blessings. This is what a blessing is when someone who is uniquely valuable tells you or me or us that you're uniquely valuable. When someone who is uniquely valuable in your mind tells you that you are uniquely valuable, that is a blessing. And that you don't forget. That almost fills you with an energy that's supernatural, that's emotional. To know someone who is uniquely valuable says, you are uniquely valuable. That's what a blessing is. But what about the need for it? Jacob has an insatiable desire to get this blessing, and this passage shows us the lengths that Jacob is going to go to get it. Even though he's the second-born, he's going to get firstborn rights and privileges. Notice that Isaac in this passage knows something's up, but because of his age, at this point, scholars think he's not only is he blind, but he's going slightly deaf. He's lame because Jacob says, "Sit up, rise, so that you may eat." So Isaac is in the twilight years of his life, but Isaac knows something's up, and he gives Jacob 3 tests to find out if he truly is Esau. Did you pick up on it when we read through the passage? In verse 20, Isaac says, "Well, wait a minute. You just left. How did you return so quickly?" And probably the grossest sin in this whole passage is Jacob's response. Did you hear it? In verse 20, Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son?" And he answered, Jacob answered, "Because the Lord your God granted me success." Terrible lie, invoking the name of the Lord in the midst of his deception. That was the first test. The Lord blessed me. The second test is, well, let me feel you to see if your arms are hairy like Esau's. And so in verse 21, he says, come near, let me feel your arms. And what does he do? Rebekah, Isaac's wife, gives Jacob the skins to cover his arms. So he feels like Esau. And Isaac says, well, you have the arms of my son. And then there's a third test, and it's a little bit more subtle. Look at verse 26. Then his father Isaac said to him, come near and kiss me, my son. In other words, his eyes are failing, his ears are failing, his body's failing, but his nose hasn't failed yet. Come near and kiss me. But what does he do when he comes in for his kiss? He smells him. Because he's wearing Esau's garments, Jacob smells like Esau. And so Isaac is finally fooled and convinced into giving Jacob this blessing, this great length that Jacob is going to go to receive this blessing. We're going to look at this passage next week. But in order to be blessed by God, Jacob is going to wrestle with God himself. Here he's going to deceive his brother. Here he's going to manipulate his father. In the passage next week, he's going to wrestle with God himself to get this blessing. And again, you might go, this is a caricature. Jacob is kind of like a unique figure in the history of the patriarchy and the church. But again, I ask, really? Don't we too have that great need for blessing? And don't we, like him, go to great lengths to be blessed by God and by others? Here is the haunting question for this morning. And here is one that has caused me, as the song lyric goes, it hurts so good. This question hurts so good. It's diagnostic, it's revealing, but it's the right question to ask. Consider this. Who, like Jacob, are you pretending to be in order to be blessed by that person? Who are you pretending to be? In this story, Jacob is pretending to be his older brother, Esau. Who are you pretending to be in order to receive favor and blessing, not just from your peers, but from God? And if you'll ask God to do this, ask him to reveal that to you in your own heart. He will. We're all Jacobs. We do it with our bosses. We pretend to be one kind of employee, one kind of worker. We pretend to be somebody else, somebody who we're not, in order to get favor or blessing from them. When you're in school, we do that with our peers. We pretend to be something we're not. We pretend to be the jock. We pretend to be the valedictorian. We pretend to be someone by the way we dress, by the way we act, by the language we use. Why? So that other person will bless us and will give us favor in their eyes. Do you see the Jacob in your own heart? Who do you pretend to be? Who do you dress up to be in order to find favor and blessing from other people? Jacob did it. We do it. That's our need and our want of blessing. At the same time, where is the fountain of blessing? Jumping into the second point here. If that's our want and our need for it, where do we find it? There's an old hymn, and the first line is also the title of the hymn. We don't sing it much anymore, but it's an incredibly pregnant and packed statement. Here's how the hymn starts. Thou lovely source of true delight, whom I unseen adore. That's the first line. Thou lovely source of true delight, whom I unseen adore. Who is that lyricist talking about? Who is he talking to? Who are we supposed to sing that song to? It's supposed to be Jesus. Jesus is that person, that lovely source of true delight, whom I unseen, who I can't see with my visible eyes, though I can't see him, I adore him. The lovely source of true delight, whom I unseen adore. Now follow this thread with me, because this is not, my opinion. This was Paul's opinion. This is the New Testament's opinion, when it comes to the source of blessing, when it comes to the source of true value and favor and identity, that comes from one person, that comes from one place. God makes it very, very convenient for us. Doesn't say you have to find it. Doesn't say it's spread out all over creation. It's found in one person. It's found in Jesus. Listen to what Paul says in Colossians. And remember, we studied this book back in the fall. This comes from chapter 1, verse 15. Paul calls Jesus the image of the invisible God, who is the firstborn of all creation. We talked about it last week. Let me address it again and put it before you this morning. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn. So like Esau, who is the firstborn of Isaac, Esau was going to get the lion's share of the inheritance. Jacob was going to get a third, but Esau, 2/3. But because Jesus is the only begotten Son of God the Father, Paul says that Jesus gets it all. Jesus is the firstborn. He's the heir. So that doesn't mean he gets 2/3. That doesn't mean he gets a third. He gets all of it. So everything that belongs to the Father belongs to Jesus. That is rightfully his inheritance. That belongs to him. Everything is Jesus's to enjoy forever. So follow the thread with me. Let's go to what Paul says now in Galatians. This is Galatians 3:13. This was our assurance of pardon this morning. Told you I was going to come back into the sermon. Here's what it says again, that Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by being a curse for us. Again, what is happening here in that passage? Because both passages are true. One is one of great favor, one of great inheritance, one of great wealth, but then we read Galatians and we go, well, it sounds the entire opposite. It sounds like Jesus is going from being blessed to now being cursed. And that's exactly what's happening in this passage. Here's what this means. Think of it this way. Think about a mother who is carrying a child. That child, without consuming food, that child without going to a doctor, that child is going to receive benefits from his or her mother's pain, from his or her mother's effort, from his or her mother's work, right? And what we would say in biblical terms is that the mother and the child are actually two separate people, two separate beings. But when a mother eats healthy food, when a mother takes in vitamins, does not the child benefit from that? And if the mother gets a vaccine or takes medicine, does not the child get the benefit from that as well? So how can two separate people benefit from one person's work? It's because those two people are united. They share flesh. Even though they're two separate people, it's almost as if they are one being. And for 9 months, what exists in a mother and a child is spiritually what exists between Christ and his people. It's one of my favorite topics. Roll your eyes if you want to. I love talking about our union with Christ. If I can put it this way, it's like being in utero with Christ, meaning that whatever happens to Jesus, whatever he does and whatever benefits he receives, we receive. Even though we're separate beings, we receive that because we are one in him. And just like a shot is painful to a mother, the child reaps the benefits of that shot, of that medicine. So too, Christ receives pain and suffering in a way that we'll never have to experience, and in a way that we will never have to go through, and we reap the benefits. What was that pain? That pain was Calvary. It was the cross. where he willingly and knowingly offered himself as the curse, to receive the curse that we deserved on our behalf. So that would be a pain that we would never have to experience. Here's what Christ is saying on the cross. He would rather have you than his inheritance. Can you see the relationship now between Colossians and Galatians? Why would Christ, who inherits all things, who is entitled to all things, take the curse upon himself? It's because of you. He would rather lose his inheritance than lose you, his church, his love, his people. And that's why he cries, one of the reasons why he cries on the cross, God, my God, why have you forsaken me? Notice the language here. Again, this is one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why Jesus says this on Calvary. When you look at John 17, when Jesus prays, he says, Father. When you look at Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, he says, Father, but he changes his language on the cross. He says, my God, why? Because he's just lost his inheritance. He's just emptied himself of everything he was entitled to as the second member of the Trinity, as the only begotten Son. He doesn't say, Father, Father, he says, my God, my God. Because at that moment, this great mystery, we don't have our minds wrapped around it. Scholars have spilled volumes of ink over what's called Jesus' cry of dereliction here. Why have you forsaken me? He's emptied himself. And he's taken the curse upon himself. To hang that over your head and say, now you better do some pretty good things for me, and no, to say, I love you. To say, I'm going to take a pain and an experience and an abandonment by the Father so you'll never have to experience that, because I treasure you and because I love you. Now, if that's true, if that's thou lovely source of true delight, whom I unseen adore, what should that do to our insides? What should that do to our behavior? What should that do to our will and our thinking? A couple things I want us to think about this morning. First is this, and I'll put it bluntly: stop acting like Jesus is bankrupt. When it comes to blessing, when it comes to favor, stop acting like Jesus is the grocery store, 2 weeks into the pandemic. It's sparse. All the important things are gone, and I'm just left with the leftovers. As the church, we need to stop acting like Jesus is bankrupt. Jonathan Edwards kind of wrote a parable, a modern-day parable about this idea, about Jesus being rich in blessing and in favor. He imagined it this way, that when he fell asleep, he had a dream, and that he went to heaven, and he was talking with Christ, and they were walking, and he walked past a door and a room, and the door was ajar, and Jonathan was able to kind of peer in the room, and he saw a room full of gifts wrapped beautifully, some small, some big, but from floor to ceiling, from wall to wall, this room was filled with gifts. And he stops his stride and he asks Jesus, what is that? What is that room, full of gifts and presents? And he imagined, again, this is like a modern day parable, he imagined Jesus saying, well, those are my riches, my favor, and my blessings that my children just haven't asked for yet. And what Jonathan kind of took away from that parable was Jesus' words. If we don't have something, it's because we're not asking. It's not because God is unwilling to give. God is not this heavenly Ebenezer Scrooge who's withholding from people. He has a treasure, a wealth of blessing to give. But we have hearts like Jacob. We don't want to ask for it. Second thing is this. Jacobs, old and modern, Jacobs have a very, very difficult time receiving things. And I chose my words very carefully with that statement. Jacobs have a hard time receiving things. if you've reduced Christianity to this religion where, we're just going to look at this really, really holy, I don't know if he's God or if he's like a God or if he's just a really good teacher. Christianity is nothing more than just a collection of this guy's teaching about how to live a godly life. And these are things we take and we offer to God. If that's your version of Christianity, that's not Christianity, and you might not be saved. Christianity is not approaching God hands full of our works of obedience and faith and saying, knocking on his door and saying, is this enough? Faith is God coming to your door with his faith, with his obedience, and knocking on the heart of your door and saying, this is enough. This is the perfect obedience you need. This is the perfect faith you need. It's 33 years worth of it. It's enough. Will you rest in it? Will you bank on it? Will you let this work be your work? Which means it is finished. Every jot and tittle of the law has been fulfilled. Will you receive it? Jacob's look at that and go, I can't do it. I can't receive help from above. I've got to bring something to the table. I've got to fight for it. I've got to strive for it. I've got to be Tom Hanks in Castaway. Remember that scene where he makes fire and where he beats his chest, and after laboring and laboring and laboring, he finally gets that spark that turns into a fire. And it's that beautiful scene where he says, I have made fire. We want to stand before God and offer something. Look at my obedience, look at my faith, look at what I've done, but that's not the gospel. That is not the path to God. Jacobs have a hard time receiving gifts. They want to earn it. They want to fight for it. They want to manipulate for it. They want to pretend to be somebody else to get it. But that's not the way in. That's actually the way out. Are you good at receiving things, at receiving gifts? That's why the gospel is so offensive to Jacobs. That's why the gospel was so offensive to Pharisees in the New Testament. That's why they killed Jesus. You don't kill nice guys. You don't kill moral guys. You kill guys who are trying to undo your self-righteousness. When someone begins to unhinge your self-promotion, your self-righteousness, your self-actualization, you mean everything that I'm doing for God means nothing? Yes, kill him. Whether in heart or in real life. That's why Jesus was killed. That's why there's so much on Jacob in the Old Testament. Are we really addressing this area of our heart? This is that Sunday morning where we ask, yes, is obedience important? Absolutely. Is faith important? Absolutely. But as a response to what God has already done for you, have you received the work of Jesus on your behalf? Are you getting in on his ticket? Because you know what happens when you do? When that moves from your head and travels into your heart, that place that you can't reach, that place where you can't touch, you know what that does? Is that takes a burden off. That gets you off that hamster wheel of good works. Of, is this enough, God? Are you happy yet? It's freeing. It's liberating. It's a spiritual sigh. You mean it's done? It's done? It's done? It's finished? Oh, we want to bring something to the table. Last is this. Again, this is where it's helpful to kind of look at books as a whole. Where did this whole idea of blessing start? And don't go back and look at it. I'm going to paraphrase it for you. We looked at it last week. It was Genesis 12, verse 1. It was the call of Abraham. Listen to the language God uses in Abraham's call. Abraham, leave your fathers, leave your land, leave your country, and go to the land I will show you, and I will bless you. I'm going to be that fount of blessing. Though I am unseen, you will adore. I'm going to be that fount of blessing. And here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to make your name great. People are going to hear about you all over the world. Right? The Hittites are going to know about you. I'm going to give you a land. I'm going to bless you with property, with space. And not just any property, the most fertile land in the Middle East, it's going to be yours. I'm going to make your offspring great. More numerous than the stars, more numerous than the sand. And even though your wife is barren, and even though you are old in age, I'm going to give you a child. I'm going to give you an offspring of your own. I'm going to bless you. And we typically stop reading right there. God, what are you going to do for me? What are you going to do for me? But we miss a critical and key part about the Abrahamic covenant. God's promise of blessing to Abraham. It's that very, very last phrase. Why is God blessing Abraham with all of these things? It's so that you might be a blessing, Abraham, to the nations. Thus, getting at the very nature of God's blessing. Why does he bless you? Because he loves you and he cherishes you, yes, but for what ultimate purpose? It's so that you might be a blessing to others. We're not meant to be this Olympic-sized pool where we're collecting all of God's favor and blessing and it's stored up within ourselves. We're meant to be vessels. We're meant to be conduits of God's blessing. As he blesses you, you bless others. People were supposed to come through Abraham's territory and go, this hospitality that I'm experiencing, this worship that I'm seeing, what is this about? Tell me about it. And Abraham and his offspring were supposed to say, I would love to tell you about it. Come in. Come see. Come taste and experience Yahweh, our God. Let me tell you what he's done for me. Let me tell you what he can do for you. See, when you're more concerned about your blessing, when you're more concerned about what God is going to do for you, when you're more concerned about what you feel like you are entitled to, when your life is wrapped up in your pursuit of being the firstborn, you know what happens? You stop being a blessing to other people. The church going forward, comes to a screeching halt. Love for neighbor stops. Care for the outsider stops. How does it stop? How does the church stop moving forward? How does the church stop growing? As we become more focused on our blessing and what God is doing for us than we are for others. That's our Jacob heart. It doesn't have to be that way. How do we unhinge this? How do we change? How do we stop our Jacob heart in its tracks and have a heart more like God's? It's by receiving, by resting, and the work that Christ has already done for you. And that does something, again, for your heart that you cannot do for yourself. That turns your labor and your work into something where you're kind of going, God, here, see this? You see what I just did for my neighbor? And instead, it just turns it into instinct. It turns works into real, good works. Because you don't care if God sees it, he sees it. You don't care if you're rewarded for it, although you might be. But you're doing it because of the great work that God has already done for you. He took the curse. He took the burden, the law upon himself. Again, because he wants you to hear this. He would rather lose his inheritance than lose you. You are his treasure. You are his people, and he's proved it over and over. Amen? Let's pray. Oh, Father, don't leave us today or this week. Spirit, would you haunt us with this question, with this truth, with this great wondering? Are we more like Jacob than we'd like to admit? Would you show us those things that we're seeking favor and blessing from that aren't you? Would you show us who we're pretending to be because we're trying to get favor from you or from others? Would you reveal that to us? Would you do that work within us? But at the same time, would you, in our heart of hearts, Would you scream to us that we are your beloved? That as much as you love this world, this earth, that we are the crown of creation, the only thing on this earth that bears your very image, and that thing that you moved heaven and earth to reunite yourself with, to be one with, to be your treasure. Help us to see it, help us to believe it, and help us to know it in our love for others and being a blessing to our neighbors. We ask all this in the matchless name of Christ, our Savior, the one who took the curse for us. Amen.